Acid rain is bad news.
Acid net rain is bad news. But as I said, you know, if we wanted to deploy stratospheric aerosols using sulfuric acid, we would not do anything like Pinatubo. Because what Pinatubo did is actually made the temperature drop. What we would try to do with solar radiation management is to lower the increase. So instead of the graph looking like this, we try to make it look like this until we got rid of carbon dioxide, and then it will come down naturally. We would not apply the same amount of stratospheric aerosols as what Pinatubo kicked up. Okay, we would use a much smaller amount. And as I say, you know, global sulfur emissions from industry is 30 million. Pinatubo was 7 million. So it would be considerably smaller than 7 million if you wanted to apply it. But then, you know, what that smaller amount effect has on the ozone, I can't answer that question. I don't think anybody can. But those are the kind of questions that we need to answer before we do it.
Thank you.
Okay. So stratospheric aerosols, I've left this one till last, as basically this is something that could cool the planet. It would not do anything about ocean acidification. Some people who are really dead set against any kind of solar radiation management are saying is that we would use this so that we could carry on burning fossil fuels. We could do that. It would be absolutely foolhardy to do it. Because one problem is, at some stage, something might go wrong and you turn it off. And it has to be turned off. And the thing with stratospheric aerosols is, in a small pilot, in a small test to start with, you could just do it, ramp it up a small amount, you looked at it, you didn't like the effects, you could turn it off. Okay? But if you're living with it for 50 years, and then you turn it off, you know, then all of a sudden that heat is going to just come right back on it. Just take the umbrella down and let all the sun come back in. And by that time we've got so much, you know, we're at 1,000 ppm carbon dioxide, we're really going to fry very quickly. It's a very dangerous thing. It could help us, but you know, it's the poster child of what's, you know, of solar radiation management, and it is something that has to be treated with a lot of care, a lot more research, coordinated research has to be done on this subject. So, coming up on that again. Okay, so this came out of the National Academy of Sciences volumes. And so on the left in the green is carbon dioxide removal, on the right is albedo modification, what I've been calling solar radiation management. And so we'll go through this list here. And starting from the top, you see that carbon dioxide removal addresses the cause of climate change. Basically, it removes the greenhouse gases that we've put up there. So it gets to the root cause of the problem. Solar radiation management, albedo modification, does not address climate change, carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases at all. It doesn't have any effect on it at all. The carbon dioxide removal will not have any new risks that we don't really understand. We're not really doing anything that is totally out of our ken or totally out of our experience. Whereas albedo modification has novel global risks. We do not know at this stage all the effects that doing this would have. And we need to understand that better than what we do right now. Carbon dioxide removal methods are expensive. All these things are going to be pretty energy expensive, all these ways of getting rid of carbon dioxide. Whereas albedo modification, as I said, you could do it with a Learjet and just do some spraying. It's pretty cheap. It wouldn't be too expensive to do it. The cloud modification, seeding, is a little bit more expensive. But the aerosols, it could be pretty cheap to do. Carbon dioxide removal will only have modest effects within decades. You're looking at centuries before we're going to make a dent on how much carbon dioxide we put up there. Even if we went to a full scale working getting rid of it, it's going to take centuries to do it. Whereas albedo modification could happen this year. You know, you did it now, and you'd be feeling it by the end of the year. Carbon dioxide removal raises fewer and less difficult issues with respect to global governments. You know, you can basically take carbon dioxide out in the US. We would be paying for it as Americans. The rest of the world would be benefiting from it because we'd be taking their carbon dioxide as well. So there's no real governance issue there, except for getting everybody to pay for it, of course. Whereas with albedo modification, as I said before, somebody might decide that they could do this amount of solar radiation management, which would be just hunky-dory for their country and very bad for everywhere else. So, moving on, carbon dioxide removal will be judged largely on the questions related to cost, because it is expensive, as I've said, whereas albedo modification has to be done on the basis of risk, because it is cheap, but we want to know what kind of risk we're taking, and we have to make a judgment of that risk. Carbon dioxide removal may be done incrementally, may be implemented incrementally with limited effects on society, and when society decides they're going to reduce greenhouse gas concentrations and slow the production of greenhouse gases. Whereas albedo modification, will have a sudden effect right away. So the last two require cooperation from major carbon emitters to have a significant effect. There's no point taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere if you're still emitting it. It's a lot cheaper to get it at source. So if you're still using coal-fired power plants, you have to take the greenhouse gases out of the stack and sequester it right there. You can't kick it in the atmosphere and wait for somebody else to pick it up, because it's more expensive to take it out of the atmosphere than it is to take it out of the chimney stack of the power plant. Whereas albedo modification, anybody can do it without any cooperation with anybody else, and that's the dangerous thing. If we start doing albedo modification and we do not cut carbon emissions, we are heading down a path that just ends in a brick wall. We're going to die if we do that. Likely future emission scenarios, abrupt termination would have limited effect with carbon dioxide removal. If we stop doing it, then carbon dioxide levels would just keep going up. If we stopped doing albedo modification and we hadn't stopped using emitting carbon dioxide, then we're going to get hot very quickly. This is just a comparison of the models that we've talked, the processes that we've talked about. The vertical scale, the y-axis on the left, is effectiveness, and the bottom axis is affordability. So you can see that basically this surface albedo urban is in the bottom left-hand corner, which is not particularly effective and is quite expensive. It's not affordable. Whereas you go up to the top right and you see that stratigraphic aerosols are more affordable and actually quite effective, as I've just finished saying to you. But you'll notice that they've got a big red dot on them. And red is low safety. Green is high safety. So that's showing you that stratigraphic aerosols are a risky way of doing things. But then timeliness is the size of the circle. The larger the circle, the quicker it would be to apply them. So you see, stratospheric aerosols win on everything but risk. All other features of them are pretty good. They would do potentially the job we want quite cheaply, quite quickly, but what are the risks? And that is the question that remains to be answered, and it needs to be answered by scientists doing research. So, this is the end of my talk. I do have the next slide, which is references to the Royal Society and to the NAS reports, if anybody's interested in them. One last thing I would like to say is, I've been talking about subjects, especially with solar radiation management, which are not particularly pleasant subjects to think about. What we're talking about is engineering the climate in a way that we hope will have an effect on a good place to live. A lot of people would say we shouldn't engineer the climate. We've tried engineering other things in the past and we've mucked it up, we've made a mess. We should not engineer the planet. I say, okay, that's probably not a bad attitude to have, but we are engineering the planet right now with how much carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide and ozone that we are putting into the atmosphere. It is engineering. That's what we're doing. What we have to start doing is engineering the planet. We have to stop doing the engineering we're doing and engineer the planet in a way that makes it a better place to live rather than a worse place to live. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks. Very, very interesting. I think it's incredibly important that we think about these things. One of the points that really, I think, didn't come out as clearly, because I'm looking now at that chart you had towards the end with the carbon dioxide management and the solar radiation management.
That
That's
one?
the one. Notice it's all about carbon dioxide, which makes the assumption that carbon dioxide is the problem.
Right.
It certainly is the biggest problem, but when you look at the 2007 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and compare that with the 2013-14, what you see is back in 2007, carbon dioxide was by far the winner when it comes to destroying our temperature. But when you look at the more recent one, what you find is methane is fast catching up. And so if we control carbon dioxide, we're not doing anything for methane. And of course, none of these do anything for methane. And permafrost, warming permafrost, methyl clathrate, all of those things, as we warm, are going to be causing much more profound methane consequences. And so, you know, the solution here really doesn't necessarily address the full problem.
But I mean, when I talked about the LNG plants, saying using stranded sources of energy, talking about Prudhoe Bay, Canadian sources of energy. One thing I said here is that there's a good reason to actually do this kind of ambient air carbon dioxide removal in polar regions, because when we're talking about methane, this is another significant greenhouse gas that it's much more effective as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. Its lifespan is shorter, but it's still a very significant greenhouse gas issue that we have to deal with. But when we measure methane, we're looking at parts per billion as opposed to parts per million in carbon dioxide. But why I said, Alan, that I would like to use Canadian stranded sources of oil and Prudhoe Bay oil is because, you know, of the CARV projects, NOAA is flying around in the Arctic looking for methane seeps right now. It's not come up with conclusions yet. They haven't published any results. But there is a thought, and I forget the guy's name, you put me on to him, from Arizona.
Guy.
Yes. He's talking about this methane issue that Alan brought up. And it is a significant problem that we have to deal with, especially with a warming Earth. We're going to get more methane being given off from permafrost and from clathrates, and there's all kinds of places where methane is loitering just below the surface, ready to come out. And if it all comes out in a rush, we're toast again. This is another life-ending thing. Why I'm saying doing this in the high latitudes is because that's where the methane is going to come out. And while it mixes pretty rapidly in the atmosphere, there will be higher concentrations in the Arctic from places where you can start sucking the methane out. And I said earlier on, when I'm talking about carbon dioxide, I am certainly referring to all greenhouse gases, okay? And these carbon dioxide removals, if you're shifting large volumes of air to take the carbon dioxide out, you're going to be really short-sighted if you're not taking the nitrous oxide and the methane at the same time, because it's shifting the air that's the main energy user. So you shift it first through your carbon dioxide scrubber, then through your methane scrubber, then through your NOx scrubber, or whichever order is the best way to do it, what the chemists will tell us. But yes, methane is a serious problem that we really need to approach. But I think in the similar methods, similar thought processes, and going there.
I have a question on habitability. When you were showing that 500 million year chart where there were much higher levels of greenhouse gases than there are now, other than reduction in land mass due to higher water levels, what was the habitability of the planet then for Homo sapiens versus now?
Okay. Well, it was, basically it was, after the Carboniferous, when we had all the forests that decayed to turn into coal measures, into the coal, we then went through a desert stage. The atmosphere, the climate on the planet has varied quite wildly over the last 500 million years. It certainly is not a constant. And we're just the tiniest little speck on the end of that 500 million years of history. And, there are 7 billion of us, clinging to this planet. Whereas there's never been, in large, animals wandering around like us, there's never been that large a number of any particular species on the planet before, which is a whole other subject that I don't want to get into. But the planet has been habitable, and the planet will be habitable if the temperature is 20 degrees hotter than what it is now. There will be parts of the planet that we'll be able to live on, and we'll be able to grow our crops on. But we won't be able to squeeze 7 billion people into those spaces. If you have a look at maps, if you go to Alan's global climate change course, you will see what happens to the United States as far as drought is concerned. When we get to you get to the year 2100, if we don't do anything, there's going to be a tiny bit of Maine and a tiny bit of Washington that are going to be not drought affected. The rest of the country is going to be affected by drought. So where is everybody going to live? In Maine and Washington? It can't happen. But, while the planet has been through this before, it's over millions of years. We have got tens, maybe hundreds of years to do something. We've got a much shorter time frame than what the geological time frame is. And there's a lot more of us.
You had an early chart where you showed the relative contribution that countries were making to greenhouse gases. India and China were major contributors.
Yes.
And probably others. Where are they at on the scale of seeing this as a problem and looking at international cooperation to try and solve it?
I believe, I've heard that China are actually really since the Beijing Olympic Games, they've actually closed down, for the Games they closed down quite a lot of their steel industry, and it has not opened up. And the price of iron ore, I'm in the mineral extraction business, and iron ore prices have not been the same since, and they're at an all-time low now. And I have heard that one of the reasons for that is because they are actually beginning to think that maybe we have got a problem. And it's be interesting if China beats us to the punch on actually agreeing as a country, okay, we have a problem, something we have to fix. The United States is still a very long way away from that, and unfortunately, I think potentially even getting further away from the idea that we have a problem that we need to fix. But I believe, there are countries out there that are thinking about it now. But if you have a look at some of those, the RCP graphs that I had, the business as usual, and then the one at the bottom, we've already missed the boat for the one at the bottom. So we're already, somewhere in the business as normal and a little bit not so bad as that in making a decision. We've got to do something about it, and then there's the lag time. It must be 30 years before there'll be peak carbon emissions, even if we decided now that we wanted to stop doing what we were doing. And we're nowhere near that decision yet. Yes?
So in your opinion, how much warmer is the valley going to get, say, in the next 3 to 5 years?
Actually, temperature estimates are quite what some of the climate deniers would say that temperature estimates are a poor way of what is the average global temperature. It's a very difficult number to scientifically quantify. And I am certainly not an expert on this field, and I would say that Alan would be a better guy to answer that question.
Well, I think if we, the data that I've seen, give us averages for something like 2035, 2045. And we're looking at maybe an average increase, I think, of up to 6 degrees. But the key thing is summer. August, for example, I think by then, and I'm trying to remember.
Fahrenheit or centigrade?
Sorry?
Fahrenheit or centigrade?
I'm in Fahrenheit. But the summers are going to be particularly warmer, and August is likely to be something like 8 degrees warmer. But then you go forward to 2075, 85. August is looking to be, I think it's something like 18 degrees hotter. I'm sorry, wrong number, 12, which that's just August. So that's stunning. And I think there's something that we need to think about. My background is in biology, and so I think Kevin deals with rocks, which are not so heavily influenced by temperature. I got interested in climate change as I was teaching ecology and looking at the really neat charts of how temperature and precipitation influence the distribution of natural systems like forests, grasslands, wetlands, and so forth. And what I was seeing was the kind of temperature change we're looking at by the end of this century will actually devastate the natural systems on the planet. And if we're looking at those 2300 kind of conditions, I just can't see the natural systems on our planet surviving. And my other area is conservation biology, so I say this a lot. I'm one of those people who actually cares about lions and tigers and bears and and dicky birds. But if you don't give a rip about biodiversity on the planet, and all you care about is human agriculture, human forestry, human fisheries, they are dependent on exactly the same climatic variables. And I cannot see our agriculture and forestry systems surviving. And this is pretty much across the planet. And Kevin is a little more optimistic than I am about the being little nests of places where a few people might be able to live. I am not convinced that it's going to be possible if we follow the business as usual scenario. For the planet's just not going to, I don't think it's going to support humans.
The planet will survive, but...
The planet will go on. The cockroaches will probably be all right because they can deal with anything.
And those little coccoliths will just have a heyday. There's going to be chalk all over the place.
Oh, I just want to say one more thing, if I can take you for another 2 minutes. There is a bill in the Oregon legislature, House Bill 3470, which actually addresses the problem. It just does it for Oregon, but we all have a moral imperative, I think, to deal with the problem as we can. So if you ever have a chance to communicate with people, or particularly with legislators, encourage them to support House Bill 3470. It's a greenhouse gas cap bill, which is modeled on California's AB 32. And it really addresses all the greenhouse gases, and it's a very worthwhile bill, it seems to me. If you're interested in doing something about it, just check with me before you leave, and I'll put you in touch with some information on it.
Kevin, thank you.